Well, hello and welcome to our Northeast SARE webinar. Today we will hear about 3 grant programs offered by Northeast SARE, our research and education, research for novel approaches, and professional development grant programs. We will also have the pleasure of hearing about the grant application and management experiences of grant recipient Sarah Williford. My name is Deb Haliba, and I work at Northeast SARE as our communications specialist. As you may know, Northeast SARE offers a suite of competitive grant programs to advance sustainable agriculture throughout the 12 Northeast states and District of Columbia. At the center of all of our grant programs are farmers who engage as researchers, students, teachers, teammates, and collaborators. Before I turn the mic over to our grant coordinators, I wanted to go over a few quick housekeeping details. Today's webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes, and we do have a lot to cover, but we will aim to end right at 1 o'clock. We are recording today's webinar, and you'll be able to find the recording on our website, as well as on our YouTube channel within the coming week. A note that you will receive a survey to provide your feedback about this webinar, and we welcome your responses to that. With thanks to the University of Vermont's American Sign Language Interpreter Services, today we are pleased to offer live captioning for this webinar, and to follow along, you will use the stream text link that you can see on the screen, and I'll also drop the URL into the chat. If you have questions, please do type them into the question box. We have organized a few breaks during the presentation to take your questions. And I will be helping our panelists to manage your questions and will otherwise be in the background if you need me. And with that, I will turn things over to Heather Oman.
Thanks, Deb. Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Omand, and I am the Associate Director of Northeast SARE. Northeast SARE serves a 12-state region stretching from Maine to West Virginia and including Washington, D.C. And all of the work that we do at Northeast SARE and all of the projects that we fund are grounded in our outcome statement, which is here on the slide, but I'm also going to read that for you. And that is, agriculture in the Northeast will be diversified and profitable, providing healthful products to customers. Farmers and the people they work with will steward resources to ensure sustainability and resilience and foster conditions where farmers have high quality of life and communities can thrive. This is really central to all that we do at Northeast SARE. Next slide, please. So the purpose of today's webinar is to support you as potential applicants to understand the differences between these 3 programs, the Research and Education, Professional Development Program, and Research for Novel Approaches, to determine which might be the best fit for your idea, to identify components of a strong application, and to empower you to feel comfortable reaching out with questions both today and beyond. So with that purpose in mind, we are going to hopefully help you identify the grant program that best fits your ideas. We'll meet with our grant coordinators and grantee, Sarah Williford, discuss a strong pre-proposal, and help you learn how to actually apply. And with that, I'll pass it to Nevin.
Great, thanks, Heather. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what a pre-proposal actually is, in case you're not familiar with the term, and how we view it specifically at Northeast SARE. So it's well, I should start by introducing myself. I'm Nevin Dawson. I'm the Associate Professional Development Program Coordinator with Northeast SARE. I'm based in Maryland at University of Maryland Extension, but am a member of the staff through an agreement between our institutions. So I work with Katie, who you will hear from in a little bit. So a pre-proposal is a short concept proposal where you have the chance to just share your idea, basically in a fairly short amount of space, just about 1,000 to 1,500 words. And of our 6 grant programs, we required a pre-proposal for the 3 larger ones. So that's research and education, research for novel approaches, and professional development. So the applicants who are invited to then submit a full proposal are those who submit a pre-proposal that has a strong database justification. And in 2 of our programs, we also require a performance target, which is basically the thing that the project is aiming to achieve in the real world. So that performance target that you propose must also be clear and measurable in those 2 programs, which is research and education and professional development. And then you'll also have to show effective approaches to achieving your performance target and your research objective if you have a research project. Projects must strive for wider adoption of sustainable practices and also be clearly grounded in that outcome statement that Heather just read for you. So be sure to always refer back to that and make sure your project is within that framework. An individual project leader or a principal investigator may submit up to 2 pre-proposals for each of our 3 programs, so 6 total. So even if you do that and you get all 6 of those receive invitations to submit a full proposal, you may only submit 1 full proposal. So you would then need to have the choice to choose between those that were invited. The deadline for all of our pre-proposals for all 3 programs is August 3rd, 2021. So we accept pre-proposals and proposals from a wide variety of organizations that we see as eligible. So that includes extension, colleges, universities, for-profit businesses that include consultants and farmers, municipalities, nonprofits, tribal governments, and state and federal departments. Applicants and host organizations may be located outside of the Northeast region, and we do current projects and past projects where that's the case, but the bulk of the work and the benefit must occur within the Northeast region. So here's a chart. I realize this is way too much to take in on a slide, and we'll have a link for that for you. And this is an overview of all 6 of our competitive grant programs. So we're going to zoom in on the 3 that we're talking about today, which are the 3 on the bottom. Before I do that, I just want to quickly point out the partnership grant. That deadline is in late spring, so not something that you need to be working on right now. But if you are thinking about one of our large grant programs, you're probably also eligible for that grant program, which is a smaller one with up to $30,000 of funding per project. And that can be a good kind of bridge into a larger program. So it's something to look at as well. So we're going to kind of zoom in on those 3 programs at the bottom. And just the things that are similar across all 3 of those programs is, for one thing, the project duration. So they all can fund projects between 1 and 3 years in length. Again, pre-proposal is required for all 3. There is a requirement for an advisory committee to be a part of all 3 projects in all 3 programs. We fund a wide range of topics in all 3 programs. And the allowable expenses are roughly the same in all 3 programs as well. So that can include things like labor, supplies, services, project-specific equipment, materials, things that wear out within the scope of the project. Those costs used to start or expand farming operations. So, regular farm equipment, a tractor, for example, and structures, those are not allowed. So here's kind of an excerpt from that chart. And you can see the differences between these 3. And each of our grant coordinators is going to focus in on their program and go into a lot more detail. So this is just an overview. So the first thing is, again, that performance target. And you can see it is required for research and education and professional development. And that's, again, basically the thing that's going to happen as a result of your project activities in the field, kind of as the next step of the things that the people you work with do as a result of their participation in your project. So each program funds a different type of work or audience. In the research and education program, those projects must include a robust farmer education program that will result in measurable on-farm changes. So that's the performance target. And that should lead to greater sustainability in one or more ways. So the focus on farmer behavior change is the key requirement of this grant program. And even though the title, research and education, makes those two components sound kind of equal, it's again really the education that's required and must be robust. The research component is optional and may or may not be included. So applicants for that program are generally researchers, farmers, educators, and others who work with farmers. The Research for Novel Approaches program funds projects that include a strong proof of concept applied research component. So that's intended to confirm the benefits and or feasibility of new practices and approaches that have a high potential for adoption by farmers in the near future. So applicants for that program generally are researchers, but they can come from any of the eligible organizations previously mentioned, such as community organizations, consultants, or traditional research institutions. A professional development project provides education for educators and service providers who work with farmers. So it's the train-the-trainer model here. And again, this one requires a performance target to show how they will take what they've learned in the project and apply it in their work. Applicants are generally people who work with farmers, educators, and or service providers. So the minimum funding for each program is $30,000. There's technically no funding cap for any of these programs, but generally we wouldn't fund a request more than $250,000 for research and education, $200,000 for research and novel approaches, and $150,000 for professional development. And the amount requested should be related to the project's complexity and duration. So again, those aren't hard caps. Occasionally, projects are funded for a little more and certainly for less. So just keep that in mind. And we'll pause for any questions if any have come up.
Great, thanks, Nevin. Yeah, we're going to be digging into each grant program in a little more detail, but we did want to welcome any general questions at this time. So again, you just type it into the Q&A and I will read them out loud to our grant coordinators. And we do have one, and which is, and maybe Callie, you can take this question. The question is, can a farmer apply for the Research for Novel Approaches grant program?
Yeah, thanks, Deb, and thank you for that question. Farmers are absolutely welcome to apply for the Research for Novel Approaches as long as they are fitting the review criteria that are laid out in the pre-proposal. Just making sure to be funding a project that has a high likelihood of adoption in the near future, that has proven success in the past, that has a proof of concept. That's really important to our reviewers. We don't fund exploratory research. So as long as you're applying and falling within the guidelines, farmers are more than welcome to apply to this program.
Great, thanks, Callie. Heather, maybe you can reply to this question, which is, how many grants do you expect to fund in each category? Is there a maximum amount of funds available in total for each grant?
Yes, and so we will get into this in the following slides, but I can tell you that for the research and education program, the maximum total funding is $2 million. And for novel approaches, it's $1.5 million, I believe, 1.5 million. And professional development is 1 million. And we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about the number of projects that will be funded.
Okay, and one last question before we move on, and noting that I see some other questions, so we'll definitely get to those. So Katie, can you confirm that aquaculture qualifies as a farm or an eligible activity?
Yes, we follow the USDA definition of farms, and aquaculture is an agricultural activity that fits that definition. Thanks.
Okay, I think we should move on, but please do keep those questions coming in and we will get to them in a bit.
Great. So as Associate Director of Northeast SARE, I am also the coordinator for the Research and Education Grant Program. Before I came to Northeast SARE, I worked with farmers on business, market, and whole farm planning. And I love managing the Research and Education Grant Program because farmer engagement, farmer leadership, and farmer empowerment is the core component of this program. So as I mentioned before, there's about $2 million available in total funding for research and education projects in this cycle. Nevin mentioned funded projects are typically in that $30,000 to $250,000 range, depending on complexity and duration, and typically last 2 to 3 years. So last year, we received 71 pre-proposals for this grant program, of which about half were invited to submit full proposals. Of those that did submit full proposals, around 1/3 were funded, and usually we're funding about 10 to 12 projects in the Research and Education Grant Program per year. And I share all that information just noting that all of the typical success rates that all of the grant coordinators will share today are based on historical numbers of submissions and could change as those numbers of submissions changes. But that's pretty standard. About half of pre-proposals are invited to submit full proposals and about 1/3 of those are funded. So the core focus of a strong research and education grant is farmer adoption and behavior change that leads to greater sustainability. Education that brings about behavior change is the only required component, and we fund many strong proposals with and without research. A strong research and education proposal that includes both research and education will make it clear that the education plan can stand on its own, regardless of the outcome of the research. This means that the achievement of the performance target cannot depend on research results. Research, when included, is clearly related to the education plan and would create new information that could be incorporated into that plan. One tip I can offer applicants interested in this program is to pay attention to the review criteria when applying for any Northeast SARE grants. Try on a reviewer's mindset. Does this project seem grounded in the Northeast SARE's outcome statement? And does the proposal clearly respond to each question and associated review criteria that are published in the call for proposals? Next slide, please. So I want to spend some time on this performance target. Terminology may not be familiar to all. And as Nevin mentioned previously, the Research and Education Program requires a performance target as part of the pre-proposal. Remember to think about that target as the best possible outcome if everything in your project goes to plan. It should clearly relate to the statement of need and guides the development of your educational activities. I've included a few examples on this slide, and I'll use the first one to illustrate what the 4 required components of a performance target are. So the first component of a performance target is the number of farmers. So in that first one, you can see 100 farmers. The second required component is the specific change or practice those farmers will adopt. So in this example, 100 farmers will adopt the use of integrative parasite control. The third component is the extent of farmer adoption. In this example, 2,000 or more sheep or goats. And finally, the measurable benefit is the last component of a performance target. So in this example, saving an estimated $28 per head in reduced dewormer usage. With performance targets, it's important to be as specific as possible. Reviewers do recognize it's not a guarantee and are looking for the performance target to be both realistic and ambitious. And remember, if you're invited to submit a full proposal, you're going to need to clearly outline how you're going to verify and document each of the 4 components of a performance target. If funded, you will be asked to report against them as well. So the tip with the performance targets is really that key of being ambitious and realistic. Reviewers seriously consider the scope of impact of a project and whether applicants have considered the quality of that impact and what is realistically possible. So the scope of impact entirely depends on what is reasonable and appropriate to your project. Sometimes 20 farmers and a total of 5 acres is ambitious and realistic, for example, maybe with urban agriculture, or sometimes 100 farmers and 2,000 acres is more appropriate with maybe an agronomic crop. There is no one size fits all. Next slide, please. Thanks. So I'm going to go briefly into a specific project that was successful in the research and education program to help share some insights into that process. So this project is improving nutrient and pest management in high tunnel tomato production. And it was led by Dr. Rebecca Seidman at the University of New Hampshire. And this project worked with farmers across several states to conduct comprehensive education and research about sustainable high tunnel production. They planned an educational approach that was broad, covering many aspects of high tunnel management, and based on the best practices known at the time of the proposal. And they relied heavily on grower networks and involvement. They then also conducted specific production research on nutrient and pest management, results from which augmented the existing education plan. So why was this a strong proposal? There was well-documented farmer engagement in the project design and implementation. The educational approach utilized a diversity of activities, including farmer-to-farmer learning and networks, field days and workshops, online resources, and one-to-one consultations between the project team and farmers. Reviewers felt the performance target was specific, measurable, realistic, and yet ambitious. It was well grounded in the statement of need, and the educational plan was clearly designed to lead to the outcome of the performance target. Reviewers felt the education plan could proceed and enhance sustainable agriculture in the Northeast, regardless of the outcome of the research efforts. And the research was well designed to complement the education plan and engaged farmers as participatory researchers. So that's the research and education program. And with that, I'll hand it over to Callie to discuss the Research for Novel Approaches grant program.
Thanks, Heather. My name is Callie McPeters. I manage 2 funding tracks here at Northeast SARE, both a graduate student research grant and a Research for Novel Approaches program, which I'm here to discuss today. My background before coming to Northeast SARE has been primarily research-based, evaluating market channel selection for Vermont vegetable producers and also investigating the impact of policy decisions and local purchasing incentives at the institutional level. The Research for Novel Approaches program was born out of the desire to fund new practices and approaches that need additional testing or refinement before recommending for farmer adoption. I personally love managing this program because it attracts proposals that are new and inventive in their approach to sustainable agriculture. And the work that comes out of this program is of strong interest to farmers across the Northeast, and the producer need is central to all of our successfully awarded proposals. As Nevin mentioned, the Research for Novel Approaches shares the same applicant eligibility requirements as our other 2 large grant programs, but does not require the educational component. It is a purely research-driven funding track that supports work that demonstrates a high likelihood of farmer adoption in the near future. It's important to note that this grant program does not fund exploratory research. $1.5 million is available in total funding for the Novel Approaches program, and funded projects are typically in the $30,000 to $200,000 range and run 2 to 3 years in duration. This is one of Northeast SARE's most competitive grant programs, and last year we received 92 pre-proposals, of which 1/3 were invited to submit a full proposal. Of those that do submit a full proposal, we typically expect to fund around 30%, which is 8 to 10 total projects. This grant program is for researchers who work with farmers looking to fund proof of concept projects. And by this, we mean that evidence from prior experiments or pilot projects strongly suggests that a practice or approach will be beneficial and feasible, but that additional testing or data is needed before recommending it for adoption. When applying, keep in mind that a successful Research for Novel Approaches proposal needs to clearly explain the gap in the research results that currently prevents the promotion of the practice and outlines a clear path for adoption to farmers should it prove successful. There must be documented interest among farmers and service providers in utilizing or promoting your novel approach. My tip for potential applicants is that you should always be conscious to write a proposal with the reviewers in mind, and plan to write for a mixed audience and assume that your reviewers have agricultural knowledge, but not necessarily a deep expertise in your proposal's subject area. And because of this, it is best to keep your writing clear and simple and avoid too technical of jargon. Next slide. So today I'm going to dive into a successful novel approaches project. This was Improving Honeybee Health and Crop Visitation During Pollination by Kristen Trainer. This is a currently active project that tests whether pollen trapping, which is a method to reduce immediate pesticide exposure, and pollen supplements to improve hive nutrition, reduce the effect of potential pesticide exposure and improve the health of honeybee colonies in commercial honeybee operations. There are 4 separate points that I would like to lift up that make this a strong project. The first being that pollinator health, the problem was well described, and although the work was designed to be only a single state project, the proposal made the case that the research is important to the sustainability of agriculture across the Northeast region. Secondly, reviewers were convinced of the need for the proposed work, which was very well described and backed by economic data. Regional survey results were presented as evidence that farmers were interested in the research, and the proposal laid out a clear plan for engaging farmers in its outreach activities. And finally, the research was guided by a strong project advisory committee providing input on the project design, including a chief apiary inspector, an insect ecology and insect pest management specialist, a blueberry extension pollination specialist, and 2 farmers. Next, you are going to hear from Katie on the Professional Development Grant Program.
Hi, folks. I am Katie Campbell-Nelson, the Professional Development Program Coordinator. And before I worked for Northeast SARE, I was a vegetable extension educator in Massachusetts. I was also the state coordinator for Northeast SARE in Massachusetts. And that meant that I conducted education for service providers, and I also helped support Northeast SARE in promoting grant programs. And while I was a state coordinator, I participated in adult learning workshops provided through SARE, and that's when I really learned that as a service provider, I needed this type of work to help me thrive in my own career. So that is why I love managing this grant program. And I manage this grant program with Nevin Dawson, who introduced himself earlier as well. And we also support the state coordinators who are throughout the Northeast. This grant program is for the benefit of service providers, and we define those as folks who primarily work in their work for the support farmers. And this program also funds folks who are service providers learning to be agricultural service providers. So some recent examples are lawyers and real estate agents who are learning to work with farmers on succession planning. Now, these proposals have to have a strong interest from the service provider and the farmers that they work with. And so that's key, is that relationship really needs to have a strong basis. I wanted to highlight that we have about $1 million available for this grant program. We typically fund that projects in the range of $30,000 to $150,000. And this grant program is the least competitive of Northeast SARE's grant programs. And we typically receive about 25 applications a year. 80% are invited and then to submit a full proposal. And of those, 50% are funded. So for all of our grant programs, I have a tip for you. I mentioned that I was a state coordinator. You may want to contact your state coordinator in your state. There is one located at each of the land grant institutions throughout the Northeast, and they may have a better picture of what's going on locally to help you out. Deb has pasted a way to find them in the chat. So now I will describe performance targets for professional development grants. So Heather described a professional development grant for research and education programs, and novel approaches grants don't have performance targets because they don't include a farmer or service provider direct change in behavior or adoption as a result of that grant program. So I'll just describe briefly how a professional development grant program performance targets written. And I really encourage you, if you have a pencil and paper, whichever grant program you would be applying to, maybe try this out. Write your own performance target out to practice. So you would start with the number of service providers who will take action to educate or advise farmers, and use a number, not a percentage. It's nice to know directly how many farmers you'll be working with. And then the actions that these service providers take to advise farmers, the number of farmers who will be educated, and optionally the scale. So the first example, at 50 service providers, will increase knowledge and skills related to no-till practices in a livestock forage system and provide technical assistance to 200 farmers managing 40,000 acres. So if you write your own idea down as a performance target, think about it and work backwards from there, thinking how many people you'll need to recruit, how many you will support in their education along the way, and then how many in the end will end up doing something to support farmers. So that's some practice for you before you apply. And next we're gonna hear from Sarah Williford. Before Sarah speaks, I just wanted to introduce her. I had the pleasure, right when I started working for Northeast SARE, to visit one of Sarah's projects, and I was really struck by how close-knit that group was. And I invited Sarah because I've found from working with her in several other projects that Sarah has funded, that she has this gift for helping things that seem daunting and challenging to feel a little bit more doable. So Sarah, tell us about your project.
Oh, thank you, Katie. And thanks all of you for having me on. I'm so excited to see all of the participants on this call. And so to introduce myself, I'm Sarah Williford, and I live in Walton, New York. It's upstate New York, and I am a farmer. I've been farming about 20 years, mostly vegetables and herbs. And a little over 10 years ago, I started working with ag service providers and farmers, mainly through Holistic Management International, and then began running a Beginning Women Farmer program for New York State. And so through that, I fell in love with tools that fall into whole farm planning, and I work directly with farmers. And I ended up applying for a professional development grant with Northeast SARE in 2016 because I wanted this knowledge that I had learned that helped me so much on my farm using whole farm planning and holistic management techniques to go beyond me working with individual farmers. And so I thought, well, I could do a program that works with technical service providers, and then they're touching so many more farmers' lives than I could, and it's all up and down the Northeast. So I processed that with a mentor and co-worker and friend of mine, Phil Metzger, and we did sort of the exercise that Katie just had you all doing. It was like, well, what would that look like? What would our performance target be? What are we trying to create? And what is our personal aim? And so ended up having it be working with 25 technical service providers who would each be committed to working with 5 farmers each. So that would be reaching 125 farmers. And as far as Katie's saying about the close-knit group, I think that just the setup of the program and dreams I had to have it be that we would become a really supportive group with one another. It helped that we were having once a year, it was a 3-year program I applied to do, and we were able to meet and have residency for one time a year. and then webinars in between for continued learning. So even though, oh, and one important thing I guess I'll share, and I realize there's going to be a lot of questions for everybody else, so I'll kind of go briefly and just want people to know that I am happy to communicate with any of you if you have any questions about the process, from a farmer perspective, from a person with a dream perspective. So one of the most important things that I found was really thinking through my milestones. So when thinking about actually going for it and having the application, it was like really, coming up with my performance target and my dream and ideas and what I wanted this to really provide in the world. And then thinking through what those milestones look like. And I found that invaluable because it helped actually keep me on track the whole time once receiving the grant. I think for me, a couple other things I just wanted to share was that I found working with Northeast SARE very wonderful and helpful. And I would say even in the process of which I know Nevin's going to get into I think Nevin's going to get into talking about kind of what it looks like to get online and apply. So anytime I had a question of either technically during the application process or a question about what one of the questions or categories meant, I was able to email and, be guided through what you were looking for. And also for me, I think one of the benefits I had was because of my previous programs that I ran, I had a connection with a social network of egg service providers. So ahead of time, before even really, doing my full proposal, I was able to send out a survey to almost 80 egg service providers to see what it is they wanted to be learning about of the categories of information that I wanted us to be providing. And that survey really helped me narrow in on something that I thought would be a successful project. I also want to say that this wasn't just me solo. I connected with an organization called the Center for Agricultural Development and Entrepreneurship. And through them, I also was able to find someone who could help me with the accounting. So I was doing the project leadership and had them as my support network, and somewhat of a pass-through organization too when it comes to finances. And one of the tips, I loved how everyone was giving a tip. One of the tips that I found very helpful, which I actually got from Northeast SARE, was that the beginning of your project is a good time to think about the end. So that was something that was really helpful for me because it started getting me thinking about how I would do the verification and reporting piece of my project. And that also helped me stay on track. I think those are my main points. So I'm going to stop there, and thanks again for having me on.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. And I just wanted to open the floor for any questions specifically for Sarah at this juncture. We'll just give it 1 minute. Good questions for Sarah. And Sarah's going to be hanging out with us for the rest of the time here together. So if I'm not seeing any in the Q&A right now, just a request to share your contact information, Sarah. Would that be okay?
Yes, please. I can do that, or would I do that right in the Q&A, or I could do it in the chat?
In the chat would be great. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. Yeah, if there are no other questions specifically for Sarah, I think we'll move on just so we'll have enough time for Q&A at the end for everybody. Great. Thanks again, Sarah. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so it's my turn again. I'm going to talk a little bit about our grant timeline. So as we've mentioned, the deadline for pre-proposals is August 3rd at 5 p.m. Eastern. And the invitations for full proposals and also notification if you do not have an invitation will go out by August 30th, 2021. And if you are invited and you will be submitting a full proposal, that deadline is October 26th, also 5 p.m. And then there's a bit of a gap for review activities. So I should mention that both the pre-proposals and the full proposals are reviewed by members of our technical committees, basically a pool of folks we draw on to do that work. And we just wanted to point out that the members of that committee are basically pulled from the same groups that the applicants come from. So farmers, service providers, agency representatives, members of our administrative council. So it's really folks like you who are doing this work. And membership in that committee is open to anyone who would like to apply, and we're happy to always receive interest in that. And really doing that work is one of the best ways to become a better grant writer as well. So then moving on, the award decision on whether your project is funded or not is distributed in late February 2022. And all projects have the same contract start date of March 1st, 2022. You're free to actually start your project activities later than that if you'd like. So how to apply? First step is to go to northeast.sare.org. And that'll take you to this page. And there's a few pathways, but right now, always the open grant programs are there at the bottom. So let's see, there we go. And so you can see the 3 pre-proposal programs that are open right there. So you can click on Learn More. So we're gonna dive in as if we're going for a professional development grant. And that'll take you to this page with some more information. And then the next step would be, you can read that, of course, but to get to the next step of actually submitting a pre-proposal, you would download the call, which is just another word for the instructions. And that will take you to a PDF that is very detailed and has everything you need to know. The first thing being the link to the online system. So that's here, projects.sare.org. And this is also a good time to mention that that's also the home of our database of all projects that have almost all projects that have ever been funded. And that's a great place to look for ideas, to see what's already been done, to see the kind of things we fund, and to also build support for your proposal. There's not much room for it in a pre-proposal, but in a full proposal, we would be looking for references to similar projects that we funded in the past that you would be building upon. So once you're in there, you'll get a screen that looks like this. So you would log in, or if you haven't created an account before, it's just a few steps. They're pretty standard to do that. So then you'd want to apply for a grant, and you would click the Northeast region, and that will show you just the programs that are currently open. So again, there's the 3 that are already there. So you can actually follow along, I should have mentioned, as I'm going through this. And again, we're, for this example, working with our professional development program, pre-proposal. So you would click Begin a New Proposal. And you can start here by editing your title. So you'd want a clear and succinct title, in title case of under 150 characters, that captures the essence without any acronyms or jargon and unnecessary words. Again, these instructions are also in that document. And you'd provide a brief description that will be used for search results. So that's not something that's actually part of the review, but it's also very important. And be sure to save early and save often. Our system is not up to where something like Google Docs is, where you don't have to worry about saving. So just make sure that you're always saving your work. Especially, I've done this, you do some work, you step away for a minute, and the minute turns into an hour, and an hour turns into a day, and you come back, and sometimes the system has timed out. So that's just a good example of why that's important. So the next thing here, principal investigator. Most of the time, the grant applicant is the same as the project leader or principal investigator. So you would just ignore that button. There are limited cases where the applicant is different than the principal investigator, and that's the only time you would click that change button, and you would add the information. If that person already has an account in our system, they'll just get added and their profile will be linked. If not, you can kind of create an account for them, but they would need to also get involved to complete that before your pre-proposal can be submitted. So if you are going to do something like that, it's important to remember that the PI is the person who is ultimately responsible for the oversight of the project, and not the applicants. It's the PI is actually responsible, and they must be housed at the same organization as the project's authorized official. So at a university, for example, that would be someone in the grants office, but in other organizations, it may be someone with a different title. But it's the person authorized to sign for the organization hosting the grant. So the PI and the person who has the authority to sign all the paperwork must be at the same host organization. Okay, so the next steps would be actually diving into the questions. So there's two sections for a pre-proposal. One's general information. That's pretty standard basic stuff. And then the meat is under the pre-proposal questions. And you know, those questions are going to vary a little bit by program. So just some common stumbling blocks. Again, save early and often. Note that a template of questions is available to work offline in a Word document format. And that does make things, can be a little easier to edit that way. And then, you know, you would just copy and paste. We do have some pretty decent formatting tools in our text input boxes. Sometimes the word formatting doesn't translate exactly, so just leave some time to finesse that sort of thing. Ideally, you know, you're not doing that at 4 o'clock, but before a 5 p.m. deadline, but the day before, so we have time to help you if there are any technical issues. And also make sure to complete any fields with red stars. Those are required. And you can see these two sections up here have red stars because within those sections are questions that have not been, required questions that have not been completed yet. And this message below that yellow box, the proposal is missing required answers. These must be completed for the submit button to appear. Once you've done all of that, some magic will happen and a submit proposal button will appear with beautiful green check marks. And that means you're ready to go. So there's still a few things you need to remember as people get tripped up with this sometimes. Once you click this submit proposal button, a new screen comes up that has a second submit proposal button. So make sure you take both of those steps before 5 p.m. And when you've done everything correctly, you will receive a confirmation email. So make sure you get that. And if you've done all of that with plenty of time to spare, and then 2 a.m. the next morning, you have a bright idea like, oh, I should have done this. You can go back in the system. You can unsubmit. This in that same spot where the submit proposal button is, it will now say unsubmit. So you click that, you can make your changes. Just make sure that you go through that whole process again, clicking submit proposal, not once, but twice. And as long as you've done that before 5 p.m. on the deadline, your pre-proposal will be officially submitted. So that's what we have to present, and we have plenty of time for questions.
Great, Nevin. Thanks for walking us through those steps. Very helpful. And I'm going to just jump right into questions because I know there have been people patiently waiting. The first question I have, maybe let's see, Katie, I'm wondering if you can answer this question. Can you describe advisory committee?
That is a good one. We do not require an advisory committee in the pre-proposal stage. However, because if you are invited for a full proposal, your project will begin, the invitations would come the end of August, and then the project would be due in October. That's a busy time at the end of the year. We strongly encourage you to form that advisory committee ahead of time to make sure you have a strong role in place. These are folks who advise you in the development of your project, but you are not participants. And so they will likely represent, farmers and service providers who are strongly related to your project and can give you advice.
Great, thank you. Heather, I'm going to ask you these questions. They're related. One is, can an applicant apply and be funded in 2 consecutive years? And then related to that, is there a cap on the PIs writing a proposal if they already have a current funded Northeast SARE grant?
So yes, an applicant can apply and be funded in 2 consecutive years, and no, there is not a cap. The only caveat to that is a new award will not be made to anyone who is not current in their reporting. So if you have a late report, an annual report or a final report for a project, you are not eligible to receive new funding. But if you are current in your reporting on active projects, then yes, you can.
Wonderful. Callie, this question is for you. For the Research for Novel Approaches program, how in-depth should the farmer engagement descriptions be in the pre-proposal?
Yeah, that's a great question. Reviewers are looking for proof that farmers are interested in the research that's going to take place and that they are wanting to adopt an approach should it prove successful. So it's definitely important that you make it clear this level of engagement. And relating back to Katie's question about advisory committee, this is a good time to be thinking about having farmers on your advisory committee that are going to be weighing in on your project design and implementation to make sure that it's truly grounded in their needs and wants.
Great. And while I have you, Callie, are there limitations on purchasing field and lab equipment in the grants for Research for Novel Approaches?
Sure. So we allow the purchase of equipment as long as it is vital to the research itself. There are some caveats if equipment is going to extend beyond the life of your project, that 2 to 3 year period. We do start to look at use of life reductions of payments across years. And I would actually have to throw the second question to Heather. I'm not sure about land purchasing. I want to say no, but let's see.
Yeah, thank you, Callie. We cannot fund the purchase of land. And to add a little bit more nuance to the equipment question, it is something that reviewers recognize that research, specifically in the Novel Approaches program, perhaps, can be an important and large part of a budget. And they also are going to look critically at any very large dollar amounts for individual equipment. And so this might be a question to follow up with the grant coordinator of the program you're most interested in offline, because it's sort of a nuanced and complex answer. But land and equipment rental is often a part of projects.
Great, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Heather. This question I'm going to move over to Nevin. So Nevin, if a pre-proposal is rejected, do applicants receive feedback at that stage?
Yeah, great question. At Northeast SARE, we kind of pride ourselves on our customer relations and customer service. So part of that is providing in-depth feedback, whether you are funded actually or not. But certainly if you're not funded, we try to provide some clear rationale as to why that was, and either clear methods for improving your pre-proposal or full proposal to help you be successful in a following year. or some indication of why your concept was not appropriate for the program you applied to. And sometimes that can mean a referral to one of our other programs that might be more appropriate.
Great, thanks, Nevin. This is a question for Sarah. Sarah, how did you focus on your target farmers? Was that through the survey you created? Oops. Sarah, you're muted. Oh, maybe we'll come back to Sarah.
Oh, can you see me and hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Some of the technical service providers were also farmers. However, when the program began, once I was accepted and the funding began, I put out an application, just connected with a lot of different organizations, and that had ag service providers in them, and word got out, asked people to spread the word. And it was an application process for my program. And then once we started the classes, the technical service providers had their own project and own way, and we communicated a lot about it, how they would go out and find the farmers that they would be.
Oops. We might have lost Sarah. Oh dear. We'll come back to Sarah because we do have several questions in the queue here. So I'm just going to move on to this question. If you request for a specific amount of money and that amount is rejected, is it still possible to receive a lesser amount decided upon by SARE, or are we out of luck? Heather, might you answer that question?
Sure. Yeah, unfortunately at this time, SARE does not do partial funding. We either approve the requests typically in full, or we do not fund. And so as of this time, we don't do partial funding.
Great, thanks. Callie, can research for novel approaches include behavioral research?
Yeah, it's another great question. Absolutely. We are seeing a lot more social science and qualitative-based research projects coming in, which is something that we're really excited about. As long as you are able to prove to reviewers that your research methods are sound and show can have significant results, they're absolutely available for funding.
Great. Heather, I'm going to target some questions at you because they're about sort of administration and then research and education. So one is funding is reimbursement. What is the frequency for reimbursement submissions and time to receive funding from submission? And then also, are matching funds required?
Yes, so funding is reimbursement based. You have to spend the money and then invoice to be reimbursed for the funds. Funded project grantees can invoice as often as monthly, and we encourage no less frequently than quarterly, and we do not require matching funds.
Great. So for research and education grant program, do we have to present a list of farmers who will be involved?
Not individuals, no. You should certainly be describing and make it clear to reviewers that you have a good sense for who the farmers are as a group, as in terms of types of farming, scale, perhaps, communities that you'll be working with and impacting, who you'll be working with, and what farmers are the ones you anticipate participating in your program, but not as a list of farm names or individuals, but more the community of farmers you anticipate working with.
Great. Is research in urban farming and urban gardening funded by SARE?
Yes, definitely. And if you access projects.sare.org and you actually search funded projects, you can type in any terminology, but urban farm or urban agriculture to see what other projects SARE has funded.
Okay, and unfortunately, we have time for just one more question because we're at time. Can reimbursement be for salaries, hourly wages?
Yes.
Okay. We do have some questions still in the queue, but unfortunately we're out of time. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to gather up all of your questions. I'm going to send them to our grant coordinators, and then we will send them back out to everyone. So you'll all be able to see those responses. So look for that in a day or two. And we'll also make sure that you have the webinar recording and the slides. I know folks requested that. In the meantime, if you would like to visit our website, I just threw it up in the chat, northeastsare.org. And gosh, I'd like to thank you so much for participating in the webinar today. And a special shout out, I think Sarah had to got booted out by Zoom, but I just wanted to thank her so much for sharing her experiences with us. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everybody. Thank you.